I'm Doug Thompson. Welcome to this edition of Legislative Updates with John Barker of the Kansas House of Representatives for the 70th District. Most of us get our information concerning the actions of the Kansas Legislature either from some form of media or after the fact, as the legislation either became law or died during the process. Representative John Barker has graciously agreed to take time from his schedule to update pending legislation as the bills are moving through committee to consideration by the House of Representatives. Right after this short break, let's talk with Representative John Barker concerning this week in the Kansas Legislature. Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with special guest John Barker. And John's been a regular on the show because it's really his show. Without John, we wouldn't have any Legislative Updates. So, John, thank you for being back.
Thank you, Doug, for having me.
And, of course, John is the representative from the 70th District. And you have flat been busy because I know when we last talked to you, the legislature was getting ready to take a break. And you took a break and you went somewhere. Where'd you get to go?
Okay, we took our break on the 7th of April, which we normally do every year to go before the veto session. And April and I wanted to get out of town. So we flew down to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We were going to spend a few days on the beach. And while we were there, when we first arrived, I got a text from Mike Teasley, the former executive director of the Eisenhower Foundation, that they had planned it, and I had prepared for it, but just in case, we'd planned it the last 2 years to go out and visit the USS Eisenhower. But it's always to the needs of the military. You know, I thought, well, with the things going on in North Korea, they may be heading aircraft carriers in that direction. But we got a call, so we got in our car, or rent a car, and drove up to Norfolk, Virginia. Stayed at the Naval Air Station's hotel, guest house, and Monday morning they met us, Mike Teasley, Meredith Selector, who is the executive director, her husband, and a couple of board members. They picked us up and took us out to the plane. We got on a Greyhound, what's called a Greyhound. It's a propellered plane, and they flew us out. They wouldn't tell us how long because they didn't want to give where the ship was at. And we flew out and landed on the carrier.
Now, when you say a propeller plane,
yeah,
it lands like a helicopter?
No, it lands like a plane, but you know most of the planes are jets.
Oh yeah. And
this is propeller.
Okay.
But you still have to do what they call a tail hook. They drop the hook, you hit the cable, it stops you.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, really fast.
And if it doesn't, you're headed to the water probably.
Well, when you hit the deck, the pilot hits the acceleration to the max, just in case you don't pick up a cable, then you can fly off. And so we landed. We spent 24 hours on the ship, met the admiral of the task force and the captain of the ship and the wing commander and the XO. Had a just wonderful tour, visiting with young sailors. I was going to say soldiers because I was in a young man.
Right.
But they had 4,500 folks on that ship, and
that's a carrier.
That's a carrier.
How many planes would be on that?
There
do
was
you know?
80.
Or is that a secret?
Well, no. I asked the same question because they had the full wing, which has a number of squadrons. I think there were about 87 vehicles at any given time, and they were in a war game scenario. They were fighting the Northern Floridians, and we were winning.
All right.
The admiral was very proud of that.
Imagine there's some bragging rights that take place among them.
There are bragging rights. Of course, that ship is a task force of 5 other ships, which are some cruisers and one destroyer.
Sure, yeah.
That surrounds the carrier. So we got there, I don't know, 2, 3 in the afternoon, and we toured the facility. We were able to go out on the flight deck as they were shooting planes off. We toured the medical facility. We had Lieutenant Governor with us, Collier, who is a doctor, and he enjoyed that part of it and got to visit with the crew, met a few crewmen from Kansas. I was just so impressed with the young sailors. I hope people were impressed with me when I was a young soldier, but I'm sure they were. I'm sure they were so smart. Run into a young lady, we would call an E5, I think it's a petty officer, and she was steering the boat. And I was talking to her and I said, well, what do you have to do to get a license? She had the wheel and she turned 3 points to the starboard, 2 points to
It's all on the radar screen in
all
front
on
of
the
her?
radar screen. The technology is just amazing.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, they are truly a floating fortress. Because did they show you when they take the planes off, if they say, okay, we're going to scramble right now, how fast they can get those up from the lower decks and
Right.
boom, and out of there?
And we were shooting off from both sides at
Wow.
one point in time.
Wow, that's impressive.
It was, and of course the F-18s and the different types of those. The Greyhound that we flew in on, they have another version of it which had the disc on top with the radar.
Right.
Because they send one of those up, and then their projection on radar is like several hundred miles, so they can.
Yeah, it's tremendous. We have a tremendous military fighting force, good young people.
We have 13 carriers in our force, compared to the French have one, the Brits have one, and the Chinese have one. Now, the Brits have used a Harrier plane, which has, at the end of the runway, it goes up. The French use our design, so actually French pilots have landed on the Eisenhower, and the Eisenhower pilots have landed on the French. So yeah, it's a wonderful.
We got to cut away, take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm Doug Thompson with special guest John Barker, representative from the 70th District. We were talking about the trip to Myrtle Beach and then out on the Eisenhower aircraft carrier. And before we cut away to break, John, we were talking about the fact that the planes launch out of there, and you got to be part of that. You landed on it.
Landed on it.
And then you took back off. What was it like?
Well, we spent the night, and I roomed with Mike Teasley, former, they have the ward rooms, and we went in, and for civilians, it's a little different. It's small. And I told Mac, I said, Mac, you're older than me. You can take the bottom bunk. I had to get a chair. I remember the day I could pull myself up into one of those top bunks, but I needed a chair. But yeah, they hooked us up on a catapult the next day after we got on the plane with straps and seat belts. And in 2.2 seconds, we were traveling 130 miles an hour.
That's fast.
That's fast.
On that catapult, it launches you out of there. You're going.
They don't say launch, it's shoot.
Shoot,
and
okay.
That's actually, the guys out there directing the crew, they have shooter on the back of their shirt, and that's who they watch. And so they shot us off the plane.
And then when you go, you're not even facing forward. You can't see what's coming up. You're facing backwards. Is that right?
We're facing backwards, and they give you a signal right before they shoot, and they want you to lean into your strap so you don't get
Tighten
that
them.
jerk.
Yeah.
So you kind of lead into them, and then, I mean, it's an experience. And then when you hit the end of the runway, you drop about 30 to 40 feet because you're 100 feet off the water, and then you just go straight up.
You're about halfway down. Did you have that sensation of the dropping?
You did.
Did it seem like that was, we were going a long ways down before it all of a sudden took off?
Well, when we launched off, it was a military aircraft, so they don't have a lot of luxuries, but it did have a really small window. So April and I could look out, and yeah, you knew you were dropping.
And
you need to do that sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to do that sometime.
The Eisenhower Foundation, I think, did it about 5-6 years ago. And I was very fortunate to get invited this time, but it's an experience. And just the sailors, I can't say enough about those. Those guys work all the time when they're on a 6-month cruise. 12-hour shifts, 12 hours off. They have some recreation. Unless they hit a port, it's all about work.
Right, and they're always doing simulations and
Fighting
what ifs,
wars.
and yeah, always, because they've got to be prepared for about anything, that happens.
I'm glad we beat those northern Floridians.
Yeah.
While I was there.
Well, you don't want to be launched off of the losing team, do you?
That's true.
Off of their aircraft carrier.
True.
Well, John, tell me about the legislature. What in the world is going on up there? Because you guys have been flat busy.
We have been. We came back on 1 May to start our veto session, which is normally 10 days. We worked some bills. We've ran a few tax bills. We've yet to develop a tax bill, a school finance bill, which I think will come out Monday. And then we've got to do a tax bill, school finance bill, and then appropriations bill. That's the 3 things that must be done before, because we're on a cutoff date with the Supreme Court on school finance. Appropriations, that's the only thing constitutionally we're required to do before we leave. But then you've got to pay for it, so that requires a tax bill. So we're looking at different options. They debated a tax bill in the Senate, which failed. We're looking for in the House 84 votes, which is the number needed to override a veto in case it gets vetoed. But the Senate this week debated that, and they were supposed to work yesterday and today, and they went home. They came in this morning.
Shut her down early, huh?
Shut down early. We worked till this afternoon, running 4 bills on the floor, debating a tax bill to remove some exemptions for sales taxes. You know, we have $6.4 billion.
$Billion.
Billions with a B in sales tax exemptions. And the problem is they've accumulated over the last 30, 40 years. And of course, once you get an exemption, you never want it to go away.
Right.
So we did take a bill up today, a small bill. In fact, the underlying bill was a tax bill for Marion County, which of course I supported, but of course they brought amendments to expand that. The first one was to put taxes on lottery tickets, which are tax exempt, to reduce sales taxes. That one failed because it wasn't comprehensive, because the leadership had not agreed to it. And I'm part of that leadership. I've met with the speaker, well, 2 or 3 times yesterday and last week. So we brought a bill out that I think it had 8 or 10 items on it, and I'll go through those, like gym memberships, towing. There's no sales tax on towing. I didn't know if you know that or not.
Did not.
Detective services, security guard system service for security guard services, except locksmith, pet daycare, mini storage, collection agencies. There's no sales tax on collection agencies, and ours totaled about $61 million out of that $6 billion, and we struggled, but we did get it passed to bring that revenue in to offset any other increase that we may have to do in the future.
How much are you anticipating you may need to bring in?
Probably we're looking at, I would be comfortable anywhere from 450 to 490 million.
So when we talk like $60 million to the average person, that's a lot of money. But when you're talking out of abatements that or exemptions that are $6 billion,
right.
That's a pretty small amount that's needed to be that's needed to be bringing it back in.
Right.
Wow.
And some of these have just accrued over time. So I had a friend of mine on taxes. He introduced a bill that would eliminate all sales tax exemptions in 3 years, unless they come back in and they get reauthorized.
Some justification for it. Is that going to fly?
Probably not.
Okay.
We had difficulty getting the 60 million today.
And what happened with the 60 million? Did it go through?
It passed, of course, and it's got to go through the Senate. So it could.
And so whatever they do, as I recall from our prior conversations, if they add anything to it, then it comes back to the House through a committee.
It would go into conference. We would non-concur on their amendment, then we'd go into conference committee, which is where a lot of work. I was in a conference committee this morning. I called one on the lottery bill, which had to do with the lottery vending machines. And so we met this morning, and we're going to meet again on Monday. I've got another one on, just finished one on local government, for Fairfax County commissioners and telemarketers. So I've got 3 or 4 conference committees I'm still working on. We have to schedule those in between our times in the session. Of course, I meet with the chairmen of those committees. So we're going to have 2 or 3 of them next week, and hopefully once we get the conference committees completed, then each side will run them on the floor. If it's a Senate conference committee, the House runs it first, and then vice versa. Okay.
We're going to cut away. We're going to take a break. We'll be back right after these messages. You're watching Legislative Updates with John Barker. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm Doug Thompson with special guest John Barker, representative from the 70th District. John, we've been talking quite a bit about what's going on in the legislature, and we were just talking about the sales tax and trying to raise some money for that. And man, it's a task to get. It sounds like it's a task to get anything done. You're going to run out of time for this legislative session. Then what happens? Well,
we go till we get at least an appropriation. The Constitution requires we can't leave unless we have an appropriations bill. Of course, if you're going to do that, you're going to have a tax bill to pay for it. And of course, we're under an order from the Supreme Court to have school finance fixed by the last of June. So those 3 items we need to get done.
Who makes that determination?
It's a coordination between the Senate President and the Speaker of the House.
And they say, we're not done, so we've got to go longer, and then the word just gets
Right.
out and away you go.
Well, they just tell us you're not going home, folks. We've already told us the next week we'll be here all week to include the weekend. Now, this weekend, of course, is Mother's Day, and the Senate went home. So I think the Speaker felt that he needed to send us home because we worked today. We passed bills out, and we had conference committees. The Senate left at 8 o'clock this
You're
morning.
getting a little irritated at the Senate, aren't you?
I do it. I joke with people. When I was at a legislative reception about a month ago when I got back from break, I showed up in January, and we started working in January. The Senate showed up on the 23rd of March because that's the first day I think they passed a bill out. So I give my Senate friends a hard time.
Well, and some of that, of course, comes with the work ethic, because some of the people who are viewing this show would know that you used to be in the judicial judge in the county. And having appeared in front of you lots and lots of times, the court starts at a certain time, it ends at a time, and we're going to work in between that time frame. And if there's more to do, we're going to go to work, and we're going to stay at it until we get it done.
I think that's true, and I had a conference committee this morning. Everybody that knows me knows I walk in the door at 8 o'clock. Not 1 minute past. It's better to be 5 minutes early than 1 minute late.
You bet.
But yes, we did a conference committee today. We've got the school finance. I would ask the viewers if they would. School finance is interesting, and we've discussed it most of the session. Larry Campbell, the chairman of the Budget Committee on Education, is working hard on it. It's a difficult subject, but also, and one of the things I don't like about the bill, they've taken out our efficiency audits. We do 3 efficiency audits a year of school districts: 1 large, 1 middle, 1 small.
I remember that.
Unfortunately, they're not doing real well. Last week, on a Friday, I had, before session started, I had a legislative post audit. We had an audit of Garden City School District. There was a lot of shortfalls. I mean, there was $1.5 million they could save. So if folks want to read about those audits of school districts, they can go to the legislative post audit. It's on the Kansas Legislative website. Go down to audit. You go to the Legislative Post Audit Committee and just pick out any of those audits, and online you can read those audits. And I would suggest they read the Garden City one, which was the latest one out on the school districts. And without those efficiency audits, the legislature does not know how effective they are, the school districts. And they've taken those out, and I'm working to get them put back in.
We've had that conversation before, and I know I've heard you say about with these audits, it's a good way for the school district to take a look and say, look, here's items and ways and directions that you can go that will save money. Yeah. And sometimes they don't want to hear that, because there's there's things that can affect the local district and a number of employees and those types of things, but there's usually a dollar savings, and it's done because of these audits are efficient from the standpoint of saying, here's some suggestions, here's some way you can do it. You don't have a way to mandate those things, do you?
No, and these were the non-critical areas that I was critical of them, and I think the Wichita paper stated it very clearly when I asked about you could save $1.5 million by eliminating these positions, because you had more than the medium or the average district of your size has a lot less people as far as IT, secretaries, janitors. He said, if I did that, if I adopt these recommendations, I'd have a revolution, quote unquote, and that's the Eagle, Wichita Eagle. So there's got to be a will to implement those type of savings.
Mm-hmm. When you come back, one of the things, of course, you've got to get done because of the mandate from the Supreme Court is school financing.
Right.
What are you projecting there?
I think we'll have a solution. The Supreme Court decision did not put a dollar amount. They used the Rose standards. Now, that these are standards. 2/3 of the kids do well, 1/3 are below, and that's the question was whether we help all kids, which I think we do. And in some cases it may be money, but it's not all money. If you're going, you got to have standards, and you've got to be able to verify that they're doing well, and that's through testing or whatever mechanism they develop. But you've got to make sure that it's throwing money at a problem does not always solve it. You've got to have standards and keep people accountable.
Sure. Well, that certainly makes sense, and that's one you've got to get done before the legislature can break.
Right.
And then appropriations.
Appropriations. We're during the omnibus bill, most of our appropriations. I'm trying to get an increase for the Office of Judicial Administration, Supreme Court. We haven't had a raise in 10 years. We have some money in there for that. But you know, the state government's bringing in more money than it did last year at this time. Unfortunately, the government's growing faster than that, and more needs.
Yeah. You've got a lot going on with the legislature, John. I don't know how you keep up with all of this, but you may be in session. Do you have any feel for how long you're going to be in session?
I think we'll be out by the 1st of June.
1st of June. Okay.
That would give us an additional 2 weeks. I would have liked to finish Monday, and I think, you know, like the Senate hasn't even taken up school finance. They're letting us carry the burden there.
Okay.
I'm not being critical of the Senate again, but it's just, that's fact.
Well, it is what it is.
Yeah.
We're going to cut away and take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with special guest John Barker, who's coming in today, of course, directly from Topeka, from the legislative sessions. And we have been talking about school finance. We've kind of covered that one, but let's talk a little about health care, because the federal government took some action. And how does all this apply for Kansas?
Well, it had to do with the Medicaid expansion. We did a couple of programs that had Dan Hawkins, Chairman of Health, and at that time we were talking about, we didn't have the $100 million to start Medicaid expansion, and we both voted no on it. And then with the federal government this week, Congress, the House, passed a bill that if it should get through the Senate and be passed, then the 10% that we had to pay, the federal government was going to pay 90, drops down to 45, 55. So instead of that $100 million that the state would have to pay, it would be $463.5 million. So I think we dodged that bullet.
I would say you certainly dodged that bullet, and thank goodness that you did. Hope you've enjoyed this update, Legislative Updates with John Barker. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time on Legislative Updates. Hope you have enjoyed this segment of Legislative Updates with John Barker. I'm Doug Thompson with special guest John Barker. Tune in next time for another legislative update. Thanks for watching.